At my daughter's wedding. She came up to me and whispered in my ear, "Dad, leave now. I'm ashamed of you." In front of my in-laws, that same evening. She called, "Transfer me $50,000 to cover the wedding costs." And I replied with just 3 words she'll never forget. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. The March morning smelled like rain and wet earth when my phone rang. I was in the vineyard checking the dormant vines for winter damage, my hands stained with soil that no amount of scrubbing ever completely removes. 20 acres of Cabernet Sauvignon stretching across the Napa hillside. My life's work, my pride, my legacy. "Dad, I have news." Vanessa's voice burst through the speaker, bright with that electric energy she'd had since she was a little girl. Discovering something wonderful. My heart lifted. Austin proposed. We're getting married. For exactly 3 seconds. I was happy. Then I heard the shift in her tone, that nervous edge that mothers learn to detect, that fathers pretend not to notice. That's incredible. "Sweetheart," I said, pulling off my work gloves. "When did—" "There's just one thing." The brightness dimmed. "His parents want to meet you. Tomorrow for dinner. Here at your place tomorrow. Not would you be available, or when works for you. Tomorrow. Like a summons, of course," I said slowly. "I'd love to meet them. What's Austin's family like?" Silence stretched across the line, the kind of silence that says more than words. Their successful dad, his father. Roger is a real estate developer in San Francisco. Big projects. His mother, Charlotte, comes from old money. The Wellingtons. The way she said it, like I should recognize the name, like it should mean something, sent a chill down my spine. I looked at my dirt-caked boots at the vineyard stretching behind me, at the modest farmhouse where I'd raised her after her mother died 8 years ago. "Sounds impressive," I said carefully. "What time should I expect everyone? 6 o'clock? And Dad?" Another pause. Maybe dress nice. They're used to certain standards." I hung up, feeling unsettled in a way I couldn't name. Something in her voice, that apologetic tone, like she was bracing for impact, sat wrong in my gut. The next day, I cleaned the house, put on my good shirt, the blue one Vanessa bought me last Christmas, set the dining table with the nice dishes. I'd planned a simple dinner. Roasted chicken, vegetables from my garden, a bottle of my 2019 Cabernet that had won a bronze medal at the county fair. Honest food. Honest wine. Vanessa arrived 2 hours early, her BMW crunching on the gravel drive. She stepped out wearing designer clothes I didn't recognize, her face tight with anxiety. "Dad, we need to talk before they get here." She walked through my house like a health inspector, her eyes cataloging everything with barely concealed dismay. The worn leather couch, the framed photos of her childhood on the mantel, the awards from local wine competitions, my work boots by the door. This is very you," she said, which somehow didn't sound like a compliment. "What's wrong?" "Vanessa." She turned to face me, and I barely recognized the woman standing in my living room. This wasn't my daughter. The girl who'd helped me harvest grapes every autumn, who'd laughed when juice stained her clothes. Purple, who'd cried in my arms when her mother died, and told me we'd get through it together. Dad, the Prestons are from San Francisco. They move in certain circles. Roger's development projects are worth hundreds of millions. Charlotte sits on the boards of 3 museums. They have expectations. Expectations, I repeated flatly. About presentation. About how things should look. She gestured vaguely at my home. At me. Maybe you could change into something more formal. And when they talk about their work, just let them talk. Don't mention the vineyard too much. They might not understand the scale of what you do here. Something cold settled in my chest. The scale of what I do. You know what I mean? It's not a big commercial operation. It's more of a hobby vineyard. 20 acres, 30 years of work. Wines that had won competitions, that had been served at weddings and anniversaries, that had paid for her college education. A hobby. Vanessa. I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not. I'm not asking you to pretend. Her voice rose, cracking with frustration. I'm asking you to make a good impression. This is important to me. Austin's family is important. Can't you just try to what? Be ashamed of who I am. That's not what I said. It's what you meant. We stood in my living room, the room where I'd read her bedtime stories, where we decorated Christmas trees, where she'd shown me her college acceptance letter, staring at each other like strangers. They'll be here in an hour, she said finally, her voice cold. Please, just please. She left me standing there, my good shirt suddenly feeling inadequate, my home looking shabby through her eyes. I walked to the window and looked out at my vineyard, at the vines I'd planted with my own hands, at the land that had sustained us, for the first time in 8 years since the day I'd buried my wife. I felt truly alone, and I had a terrible feeling this was only the beginning. I didn't change my shirt. Call it stubbornness. Call it pride. I don't know, but I stood at that window for a long time, remembering Vanessa had been 6 when we planted the eastern section. She'd insisted on helping, her tiny hands pressing soil around the rootstock while I explained how these small plants would grow into something magnificent if we were patient, if we cared for them properly, like magic. Daddy, she'd asked. No, sweetheart, I told her. Better than magic. It's work and time and love. She'd believed me then. She'd believed in this place, in this life. When had that changed? I traced the timeline backward. A year ago. She had met Austin at some tech industry mixer in the city. He worked for his father's investment firm. Or rather, he had an office there and a title that sounded important. She'd been excited, talking about him constantly. He's so sophisticated. Dad, so polished. He knows all these fascinating people. 6 months ago, the visits home became less frequent. When she did come, she'd glance around the house with a look I'd started recognizing. The same look tourists gave roadside farm stands. Appreciative, but distant. Like it was quaint, but not quite real. 3 months ago, she'd suggested I might want to update the house. Just small things. Dad, maybe new furniture. Something more contemporary. I'd laughed it off, not understanding she was serious. Now I understood. She'd been preparing me for this moment, or rather, preparing herself to be embarrassed by me. The Tesla arrived precisely at 6. I knew it was a Tesla because Vanessa had mentioned it 3 times in the past hour, like the car brand was somehow relevant to my character assessment. Through the window, I watched 3 people emerge. Austin, tall and sharp-edged in an expensive suit. Roger, his father, built like someone who'd won at life, an expected acknowledgement of that fact. And Charlotte, blonde and brittle, scanning my property with the expression of someone calculating property values. I opened the door before they could knock. Old habit. You greet guests. You don't make them wait on the porch. Mr. Cooper, Austin said, extending his hand without warmth. Good to finally meet Vanessa's father. His grip was aggressive, like he was making a point. I matched it and watched his eyes flicker with surprise. Vineyard work builds strength, the kind that doesn't advertise itself in gym muscles. Leonard, I said, please come in. Charlotte stepped inside and immediately began what I can only call an inventory, her gaze sweeping across every surface, every piece of furniture, every choice I'd made in 30 years of living here. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "What a rustic home," she said. "So authentic. Authentic, like I was a museum exhibit." "We like it," I said simply. Roger moved past the pleasantries to what clearly interested him more. "Nice piece of land you've got here." "Leonard. How many acres? 20. Must be worth a pretty penny these days. Napa real estate has been climbing. You ever think about selling?" We hadn't been inside my house for 2 minutes, and he was already appraising it like livestock. "Not interested in selling," I said. "This land's been my life's work. Everything's for sale at the right price." He said it casually, like it was a universal truth. Like my life's work was just another transaction waiting to happen. Dinner was exactly as uncomfortable as I'd feared. I served the food I'd prepared, good food made with care. But Charlotte picked at it like she was searching for violations. Roger dominated the conversation, talking about his development projects with the assumption that everyone was fascinated. Austin performed support, throwing in comments about investment strategies and market opportunities. Vanessa laughed at their jokes, loud, nervous laughter that didn't sound like her. When I tried to talk about the vineyard, about the process of wine, making aching, she cut me off. "Dad, they don't need to hear all the technical details. I was just explaining." "I'm sure it's very interesting to you," Charlotte interrupted with poisonous sweetness. "But Roger was telling us about the museum benefit. It raised over $3 million. Can you imagine $3 million for a single event?" The message was clear. Your small concerns don't register in our world. I poured the wine I'd brought up from the cellar. One of my best bottles. A 2019 that had taken years to develop its complexity. Roger took a sip and nodded like he was confirming something unfortunate. "Not bad for a hobby operation," he said. "Charlotte and I usually drink from the Rothschild collection, but this has character." Character. The way he said it. It wasn't a compliment. Austin leaned back in his chair, gesturing with his wine glass. "Real estate's the smart play these days. Leonard, land like this in Napa. You could sell, invest the capital properly, and make more in a year than you do farming grapes. I'm not farming grapes for the returns," I said quietly. "I'm making wine because it matters." He smiled. The smile of someone who just confirmed you were exactly as naive as he'd suspected when they finally left. Vanessa lingered on the porch. "That went well," she said, trying to convince herself. "They liked you." I looked at my daughter, this stranger wearing Vanessa's face, and felt something break inside my chest. Did they just confirm everything they already assumed? "Dad, don't be dramatic. You're being too sensitive." Am I, or am I finally seeing clearly? She drove away without answering, tail lights disappearing down the hill. I sat on the porch as darkness settled over the vineyard, the vines silent witnesses to everything that had just happened. For 8 years since losing my wife, this land had been enough. My work had been enough. Vanessa had been enough. But somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being enough for her, and the worst part, I had a feeling tonight was just the opening move in a game I hadn't realized we were playing. The 3 months between that dinner and the wedding were a masterclass in erosion. Not the sudden collapse of a cliff face, but the slow wearing away of stone by water. Relentless. Methodical. Impossible to stop once it begins. Vanessa's visits became rare. When she did come, it was always with an agenda. "Dad, the Prestons invited us to their charity gala next month. It's at the Fairmont. Very formal. Maybe you could buy a proper suit. Something tailored." I was pruning vines when she said it. my hand steady with the shears. I have a suit. You have a suit from 2010 that you wore to Aunt Marie's funeral. It still fits. She sighed. That particular sigh people use when they've decided you're being deliberately difficult. This is important to me. These events matter. People notice these things. People. Not I notice people. As if she'd outsourced her judgment to a committee of strangers in expensive clothes. I'll think about it, I said, which we both knew meant no. She drove away frustrated, and I returned to the vines. Funny thing about grapevines, they don't care what you wear. They respond to consistency, patience, and honest work. No performance required. Austin started appearing. 2, always unannounced. He'd drive up in that silent Tesla, emerging with his designer sunglasses and practiced smile like he was doing me a favor by visiting. Just thought I'd check in. Leonard, see how you're managing the property. Managing. Like I was a caretaker rather than the owner. He'd walk through the vineyard asking questions that sounded innocent but weren't. How much maintenance does 20 acres require? Must be exhausting at your age. Ever think about scaling back? Maybe selling a few acres to make life easier. The first time I was polite. The second time I was firm. By the 4th visit, I understood what I was looking at. A wolf circling, testing for weakness, waiting for the moment to strike. Land's not for sale. Austin. Of course not, he'd say smoothly. Just concerned about you. Vanessa worries. We both do. Liar. I could see it in his eyes. The way they tracked across my property like a calculator running numbers. He didn't see soil and vines. He saw dollar signs and development potential. Charlotte called during these visits. 2. She had Vanessa's number memorized and a talent for timing her calls. When I was within earshot, her voice would carry through the phone, sharp and penetrating. Darling, about the wedding. We really must discuss the father of the bride's situation. I know you love him, but presentation matters. Perhaps he could sit at a side table. We can't have him at the head table in that old suit. What would the Harringtons think I watched my daughter's face during these calls? Watched her agree. Watched her apologize for me like I was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be defended. Mom says maybe you could skip the reception. She asked once, not meeting my eyes. You could come to the ceremony and then leave before dinner. It might be easier. Easier for whom? For everyone. There was that word again. The invisible jury that had convicted me of the crime of being insufficiently impressive. I noticed other things. 2. The way Vanessa's vocabulary changed, peppered with phrases like optics and networking opportunities, and brand alignment. She'd started talking about people as assets, relationships as investments. Austin's language, Austin's worldview, creeping into her like ink and water. One afternoon in April, I found her photographing my house, not fondly, but analytically, like she was documenting evidence. What are you doing? She startled. Guilty. Nothing. Just Austin wanted to see where I grew up. But her camera roll told a different story. She'd focused on the worn spots, the faded paint, the modest furniture. Building a case. I realized. Proof that she'd risen above her humble origins, that she deserved her place in Austin's world. My daughter had become a stranger who wore Vanessa's face. The worst was the rehearsal dinner in late April. The Prestons hosted it at some restaurant in San Francisco that had a 6-month wait list and no prices on the menu. I sat at the end of the table while Roger held court talking about his latest development project. Luxury condos where a historic Filipino neighborhood used to be. Progress requires sacrifice, he announced. And everyone nodded like he'd said something profound instead of something monstrous. Charlotte monopolized Vanessa, discussing flower arrangements and guest lists. And whether the champagne should be Cristal or Dumpy Renon. My daughter listened like a student before an exam, desperate to get the answers right. Austin caught my eye once and smiled. A predator's smile, all teeth and no warmth, in that moment. I understood something fundamental. This wasn't about Vanessa. It had never been about Vanessa. She was a means to an end, and the end was sitting on 20 acres of California wine country, worth more than Austin would make in a decade. I excused myself early, claiming exhaustion. Nobody protested. I don't think anyone noticed I'd left. Driving home through the dark hills, I passed vineyard after vineyard, small operations like mine, family businesses built over generations. Each one represented someone's life work, their legacy. Their dreams fermented into something beautiful through patience and care. Austin and his father saw these places as obstacles to profit. Vanessa had started seeing them that way. 2. I was losing my daughter to people who valued nothing but acquisition. And the worst part, she was going willingly, trading her inheritance for acceptance into a world that would never truly embrace her. But I wasn't beaten yet. You don't survive 30 years of farming without learning that some fights can't be won through force. Sometimes you have to be patient. Watch the weather. Wait for the right moment to harvest. My moment was coming. I just needed to recognize it when it arrived. The wedding invitation arrived in early May, heavy cardstock with gold embossing. My name rendered in calligraphy that probably costs more than my monthly water bill. Dress code, black tie. Location, the Preston estate. At the Thurton, I bought a new suit. Not because Vanessa asked, but because I wanted to walk into that wedding with dignity. Let no one say I didn't try, that I didn't make the effort, that I didn't give my daughter every chance to remember who I was before she chose to forget. The Preston estate wasn't a house. It was a monument to excess. Raw iron gates, circular driveway with a fountain that could have irrigated half my vineyard. Valets and matching uniforms who looked at my 10-year-old truck like I'd arrived on a donkey. The ceremony was in the gardens, 300 guests seated in pristine white chairs. String quartet, playing something classical and emotionless. I sat in the third row, not the front where fathers typically sit, but far enough back to avoid embarrassing anyone important. Vanessa looked beautiful in her wedding dress, for a moment, watching her walk down the aisle on her own. No father to give her away, because that tradition was outdated. She'd said, I saw the little girl who'd helped me harvest grapes, who'd laughed when juice stained her clothes purple. Then she reached Austin, and that girl disappeared. The woman who took his hand was someone else entirely, someone polished and perfect and hollow. The ceremony was mercifully short. The reception was agony. The ballroom, they had a ballroom, was decorated like something from a museum. Crystal chandeliers, gold, everything. Tables with centerpieces that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The Preston had invited everyone who mattered in San Francisco society, and precisely none of them had any interest in talking to a vineyard owner from Napa. I found my table, number 24 near the kitchen doors, far from the head table where my daughter sat with her new in-laws. My table mates were distant cousins of Charlotte's, people who made polite conversation for exactly 6 minutes before turning to talk among themselves. I watched the reception like a visitor from another planet. Watched wealthy people congratulate each other on their wealth. Watched Austin and Roger work the room like politicians, making connections, discussing deals. Watched Charlotte hold court, dripping with jewelry and judgment. And I watched Vanessa, my daughter, scanning the crowd with anxious eyes, checking constantly to see if she was performing correctly, if she was meeting expectations. Around 8 o'clock, she approached my table. My heart lifted foolishly, thinking maybe she'd come to share a dance, to have one genuine moment with her father on her wedding day. She bent down, her face close to my ear, her breath wine sweet, and her voice ice cold. "Dad, you need to leave. I'm ashamed of you in front of the Prestons. You don't fit in here." The words hit like bullets, not because they were cruel, though they were, but because they were calculated. She'd thought about this, rehearsed it, decided this was the right moment to wound me. I stood without a word, didn't make a scene, didn't argue. I walked out of that ballroom, past the valet, got in my truck, and drove home through the dark with my hands shaking on the wheel. Not from sadness, from rage. I sat on my porch until 11, drinking wine I'd made with my own hands, watching the stars over my vineyard, understanding with crystalline clarity that I'd just been dismissed from my daughter's life like a servant who'd outlived his usefulness. At 11, my phone rang. Vanessa. For one stupid second, I thought she was calling to apologize. "Dad, you need to transfer $50,000 to my account for the wedding expenses. Roger says it's the least you can do after embarrassing us tonight." $50,000 for a wedding I'd been asked to leave for a reception, where I'd been hidden away like shameful cargo for a daughter who traded her father for a family who saw him as an obstacle to liquidate. I looked at my phone at Vanessa's name on the screen, at the last remnants of who she used to be, evaporating in the California night, and I said 3 words that changed everything. "See you in court." I hung up. She called back immediately. I didn't answer. She called 6 more times. I turned off my phone. I sat there on my porch, and something fundamental shifted inside me. The father who'd tried to understand, who'd made excuses, who'd hoped his daughter would come to her senses, that man was gone. In his place was someone who understood that patience wasn't always a virtue, that some people mistake kindness for weakness, that my daughter and her new family had looked at my life's work and seen only one thing: an asset to be acquired. They thought I was too old, too simple, too tired to fight back. They were about to learn that grapes aren't the only thing that gets more potent with age. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Marcus Wade, a property attorney in Napa, who'd helped me draft my will years ago. The second was to Clayton Hughes, a real estate appraiser I'd met at a wine industry conference. I had questions that needed answers about trusts, about property values, about exactly how much my daughter and her new husband thought they'd be inheriting because I'd finally understood what I was dealing with. This wasn't about family. This was a business transaction, and I'd been too blind to see it. Austin hadn't fallen in love with Vanessa. He'd fallen in love with my balance sheet. Well, business could be played many ways, and I'd spent 30 years learning patience, strategy, and the value of perfect timing. Wine needs time to mature. Revenge, I was discovering, has the same requirement. By the time the sun rose over my vineyard that morning, I wasn't mourning what I'd lost. I was planning what I'd protect, and how I'd make them understand that you don't steal from a man who spent his life cultivating things that take years to bear fruit. This harvest would be unlike anything they expected. Marcus Wade's office smelled like leather and old paper, the scent of contracts that held lives together or tore them apart. I'd called him at 7 that morning, the day after the wedding, and he'd agreed to see me immediately. 30 years of knowing someone builds that kind of trust. "Leonard," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "You sounded urgent on the phone. I laid it out for him. The wedding, the dismissal, the demand for $50,000. And then I asked the question that had kept me awake all night. My will leaves everything to Vanessa. the vineyard, the house, all of it. Can I change that? Marcus leaned back, fingers steepled. You can change your will any time. But you said everything. Is the property solely in your name? Yes, has been for 30 years. Then, legally, it's yours to do with as you please. He paused, studying my face. But Leonard, this is your daughter we're talking about. Are you sure you want to? She asked me to leave her wedding because I embarrassed her, then called an hour later, demanding money. My voice was steady, cold. I'm not sure about anything anymore, except that I need to protect what I've built. Marcus nodded slowly. There are options, trusts, conditional inheritances, charitable foundations. What exactly are you trying to accomplish? I'm trying to make sure my land doesn't get turned into condos the day after my funeral. That's when I understood what Marcus had been dancing around. He'd seen this before. Families destroyed by money, children circling like vultures, legacies demolished for quick profit. Give me a few days, he said. I'll research your options and we'll talk. I left his office and drove straight to Clayton Hughes's real estate appraisal firm. Clayton was someone I'd met at a wine industry conference 3 years ago, a straight shooter who'd helped several small vineyard owners understand their property values during a tax reassessment. Leonard Cooper, he said, shaking my hand warmly. What brings you in? I need to know what my land is worth. 20 acres, established vineyard, farmhouse, equipment, current market value. He raised an eyebrow, thinking of selling, thinking of knowing what I've got. It took him 2 days. When he called me back, the number hit me like a punch. 4.22 million, Clayton said. The Napa market has exploded in the past 5 years. Your location, your established vines, your water rights. You're sitting on a gold mine. Leonard, $4.2 million. I'd known the land was valuable, but this was generational wealth. This was why Austin had started showing up, why Roger had asked about selling, why the whole Preston family had tolerated my daughter marrying beneath their perceived station. They weren't tolerating anything. They were investing. Clayton, one more question. Has anyone contacted you or any other appraisers about my property recently? Silence on the other end. Then, carefully. I can't discuss other clients. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking if someone has been shopping around valuations for land they don't own yet. Another pause. Leonard, I can't confirm names, but I can say that 3 weeks ago, someone did ask me to provide a preliminary valuation for a property matching your description. They said it would be changing hands within the year, and they were interested in development potential. My hands tightened on the phone. Development potential. They specifically asked about subdivision possibilities. How many lots could fit on 20 acres? What the zoning restrictions were? Whether the agricultural designation could be challenged. I thanked Clayton and hung up, stood in my living room, looking out at the vineyard I'd spent 30 years cultivating, understanding with perfect clarity what I'd been too blind to see before. Austin hadn't fallen in love with my daughter. He'd fallen in love with my address. The wedding wasn't about family. It was a business transaction. Get the girl, wait for the old man to die, inherit the land, bulldoze the vines, subdivide the property, build luxury homes, flip them for millions. Vanessa was a key to a vault she didn't even know existed, and I'd been so focused on losing my daughter that I'd missed the wolf already inside my house, measuring the walls. That evening, I opened a bottle of my 2018 reserve, the wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. This qualified. I sat on my porch as the sun set over the hills, turning the sky the color of young Pont Noir. and I thought about patience. Wine doesn't rush. You can't force fermentation. Can't hurry aging. Can't skip the careful process of turning bitter grapes into something worth savoring. Any fool can crush grapes and get juice. The art is in the waiting, the watching, the knowing exactly when to act. Austin and his family had made a fundamental mistake. They'd assumed that because I was simple. I was stupid. That because I worked with my hands. I didn't understand numbers. That because I was patient. I was passive. They were about to learn the difference between patience and weakness. My phone rang. Vanessa. I watched it buzz on the table, her name illuminated in the gathering dark, and I didn't answer. She called 3 more times that week. I ignored each one. Let her wonder. Let her worry. Let them all start to suspect that maybe the old man wasn't quite as cooperative as they'd assumed. Marcus called on Friday. "I've drafted 3 options for you. Can you come in Monday? I'll be there." I spent the weekend in the vineyard, tending the vines, checking the irrigation, doing the work that had defined my life. But now I saw it differently. This wasn't just my livelihood anymore. It was a fortress, and I was preparing its defenses. Monday morning. Marcus spread the documents across his desk like a general planning strategy. Option 1. Revocable trust. You maintain control, but can change terms any time. Option 2. Irrevocable trust with conditions. Option 3. Full transfer to a charitable foundation upon your death. I studied each one, understanding their implications. The irrevocable trust. Explain that one again. You transfer the property into a trust. Upon your death, it goes to designated beneficiaries, but only if they meet specific conditions you set. Now, if they don't meet those conditions, it goes to a backup beneficiary, usually a charity, and once it's set up, I can't change it. Not without extraordinary circumstances. That's the irrevocable part. But it also means no one can pressure you to change it later. I thought about Austin, about Roger, about their lawyers and their money, and their absolute certainty that they could manipulate an old man into giving them what they wanted. "Let's do the irrevocable trust," I said, with very specific conditions. Marcus smiled grimly. "What kind of conditions?" "The kind that separate people who love the land from people who love the money." We worked for 3 hours drafting terms that would protect my legacy while giving Vanessa one chance. One narrow, difficult chance to prove she valued what I'd built more than what it could be sold for. When we finished, Marcus looked at me with something like respect. "Leonard, this is bulletproof, but it's also going to make you extremely unpopular with your family." "Marcus, they kicked me out of a wedding and demanded $50,000. I don't think we're at risk of losing anything that still exists." He nodded. "I'll have the final documents ready by Friday. We'll need witnesses, notarization, the full legal framework. Once you sign, there's no going back." "Good," I said. No going back is exactly what I want. June arrived with the heat that makes grapes swell on the vine. I'd spent 3 weeks quietly, methodically building my fortress. The trust was signed, notarized, filed with the county. My will was updated. Everything was in order. Vanessa had called 14 times. I'd answered none of them. Let silence do its work. The appraisal was complete. The trust was ironclad. And I'd added one final touch. I'd asked Clayton to document every inquiry he'd received about my property, including dates, names when possible, and specific questions asked. He'd provided a detailed report. It made for interesting reading. Austin Preston had contacted 4 different real estate firms about my land. Not his family's future property or his father-in-law's vineyard. He'd specifically said the Cooper property like it was already his to sell. I was admiring this documentation on a Thursday afternoon when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Not the usual delivery truck or neighbor's car. Multiple vehicles. I walked to the window. Vanessa's BMW, Austin's Tesla, and a gray sedan I didn't recognize. Showtime. They approached the door with the confidence of people who've already won. I opened it before they could knock because I wanted them off balance from the start. "Dad," Vanessa said, trying for warmth and achieving something closer to anxiety. "We've been trying to reach you. I know I've been busy. We need to talk." She gestured to the two men beside her. "This is Austin." "Of course. And this is Mr. Peaton. He's a notary. We thought it would be helpful to have him here for what we need to discuss." A notary. They'd brought a notary to my house. The audacity was almost impressive. "Come in," I said pleasantly. "Let's discuss." They settled in my living room, the same room where they had once sat at dinner, barely concealing their contempt. Austin held a leather folder like it was a sacred text. Vanessa perched on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tight. "Dad," she began, using the voice people use with confused elderly relatives. "We're concerned about you. Managing this property alone at your age, it's a lot of responsibility. I've managed fine for 30 years, but things change," Austin interjected smoothly. "Property values, tax implications, maintenance costs. We think it might be time to consider transferring ownership to family who can handle the complexity." He said family like the word meant something like he hadn't married my daughter 3 weeks ago, primarily for access to my land records. "Handle the complexity," I repeated. "You mean sell it?" Vanessa's eyes flickered. "Not necessarily sell, but having options is smart. The Preston have connections with developers who could maximize the property's value by tearing down everything I've built and putting up houses." Silence. Austin's smile tightened. "Let's not be dramatic. Leonard, we're talking about securing your legacy, Vanessa's future, our family's financial stability." "Our family," I said softly. "Is that what we are?" Austin opened the folder with a flourish. "We've had attorneys draft transfer documents. Simple. Straightforward. You deed the property to Vanessa now. Maintain lifetime residence rights, and ensure everything transitions smoothly when the time comes." He slid the papers across my coffee table like he was doing me a favor. The notary shifted, uncomfortable, probably wondering if he was witnessing elder manipulation and whether he should object. I looked at the documents without touching them, looked at my daughter, who couldn't meet my eyes, looked at Austin, whose smile had the quality of a shark scenting blood. Then I stood up, walked to my desk, and retrieved my own folder. "Interesting," I said, returning. "I have some documents, too." I laid them out methodically. The property appraisal showing $4.2 million. The report from Clayton listing Austin's inquiries to real estate firms. The signed and notarized irrevocable trust documents. The color drained from Austin's face like wine from a broken bottle. It was magnificent. His jaw went slack. His eyes widened. And for 3 beautiful seconds he looked exactly like what he was, a con artist. Realizing the mark just turned the tables. "What is this?" His voice came out strangled. "This," I said calmly, "is an irrevocable trust. As of 3 weeks ago, this property is no longer mine to give away. Upon my death, it transfers to a charitable foundation supporting small family wineries, unless my daughter meets very specific conditions." "What conditions?" Vanessa whispered. "She must work this vineyard personally for 5 years. She cannot sell the land for 15 years. She must maintain it as a working agricultural operation." I paused. Otherwise, it all goes to charity. Every acre. Every dollar. Austin's face had progressed from white to a mottled red. You can't do this. I already did 3 weeks ago, while you were calling appraisers about development potential. I tapped the report. Did you really think Clayton wouldn't tell me? We've been friends for years, you senile old. Austin caught himself, but the words hung in the air like smoke. Careful, I said, my voice sharp as pruning shears. Mr. Piton is a notary. He's a witness, and I'm documenting everything. Vanessa found her voice. Dad, why would you do this? I'm your daughter. You told me to leave your wedding because you were ashamed of me. Then you demanded $50,000. Then, you showed up with a notary to trick me into signing over my life's work. I looked at her directly for the first time. When exactly was I supposed to believe you cared about being my daughter? Her mouth opened and closed. No words came out. Austin stood abruptly, his chair scraping loud against the floor. This isn't over. We'll challenge this. You're clearly not of sound mind. Then you'll need to prove it in court, where I'll present evidence that you were attempting to defraud me out of millions of dollars through marriage. I believe they call that a con. I watched him process this, watched the calculation in his eyes, the lawyer in his head running scenarios. They'd lose. They both knew it. You know what the funny thing is? I said conversationally. Wine takes patience. You plant vines. You wait years for them to mature. You carefully tend them through seasons. You can't rush it. You can't cheat it. I smiled without warmth. But you thought you could rush me. Thought you could cheat me. Austin grabbed his folder, crumpling the useless documents. This is a mistake. Old man, you just made an enemy of the wrong family. I think I made an enemy of the right family. The kind of family I don't want anywhere near my legacy. He stormed out, the notary scurrying after him. Vanessa remained. Tears running down her face that might have been genuine or might have been another performance. I couldn't tell anymore, and I discovered I didn't care. Daddy, please. The conditions stand. If you want this land, you'll earn it the way I earned it. With work, with time, with respect for what it means. I held her gaze. But I don't think you will. I think you'll choose Austin's money over my dirt, and that's your choice to make. She left without another word. I sat in my living room, listening to their cars leave, feeling the weight of what I'd done settling over me like evening fog over the vineyard. This would get ugly. There would be lawyers, arguments, probably attempts to have me declared incompetent. But I'd protected what mattered. The land would survive. The vines would grow. And if Vanessa ever found her way back to who she used to be, there was still a path home. Just a very specific, very narrow path that required her to actually care. Through the window, I could see the vineyard in the late afternoon sun, rows of vines marching up the hillside like soldiers. 30 years of work, 30 years of patience. Austin wanted to turn all of this into money in a year. Well, he just learned something about patience, and I just taught him something about underestimating the old man with dirt under his fingernails. The war was just beginning. But the first battle, that one was mine. The week after my confrontation with Austin and Vanessa, silence descended like fog over the vineyard. No calls, no visits, no attempts at reconciliation. I knew what that silence meant. They were regrouping, strategizing, preparing their next move. I wasn't idle either. Marcus and I spent hours reviewing the trust documents, looking for any possible weakness they might exploit. We found none. The paperwork was airtight, witnessed by 3 people, notarized, and filed with every relevant agency. My mental competency at the time of signing was documented by my doctor, who'd given me a routine physical 2 days before. Everything was bulletproof, but I underestimated Roger Preston's reach. The first attack came through my neighbor, Isabella Rossi, who owned the vineyard adjacent to mine. She stopped by on a Tuesday morning, her face troubled. "Leonard, I need to tell you something. A man came to see me yesterday, said he was a lawyer representing your daughter. He was asking questions about you." "What kind of questions?" "About your memory, whether you seemed confused lately, whether you'd been acting strangely." Her eyes were worried. "I told him you were sharp as ever. But Leonard, what's going on?" I explained the situation. Not all of it, but enough. Isabella listened, her expression hardening. "They're trying to build a case that you're incompetent," she said, "to invalidate the trust. I know, but I saw it coming. By mid-July, the legal papers arrived. Roger Preston had hired Whitmore and Associates, one of San Francisco's most aggressive law firms. They were filing a petition to have the trust declared invalid on grounds of diminished mental capacity. Supporting the petition was an affidavit signed by Vanessa Cooper Preston, stating that her father had exhibited confusion, memory loss, and erratic decision-making consistent with early-stage dementia. Reading my daughter's signature on that document felt like swallowing broken glass. Marcus called immediately after receiving his copy. "Leonard, this is serious. They're not playing around. Neither am I. What do we need? Medical evaluation, cognitive testing, character witnesses. And we need to be proactive. We can't just defend. We need to attack their credibility." "What do you mean, I mean?" "We find out why Austin really married your daughter. We prove this was fraud from the beginning." I remembered Clayton's report about Austin contacting real estate firms. I might already have something. I spent the next week gathering evidence. Clayton provided detailed records of every conversation he'd had with Austin or his representatives. I contacted the other appraisers Austin had approached. 2 of them were willing to provide statements about his specific questions regarding subdivision and development. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. I was in town buying supplies when I ran into Jack Morrison, a realtor I'd known casually for years. He pulled me aside at the hardware store. "Leonard, I heard about your legal troubles. I thought you should know. Austin Preston approached me in April. He wanted to know the development potential of your land, asked specifically about turning 20 acres into luxury home lots. Do you still have records of that conversation, Matter?" "I have emails. He was very specific about timelines, said the property would be in family hands by summer and ready for development by fall." Jack's expression was grim. He wrote that in April, Leonard, 2 weeks before his wedding. Evidence cold, hard, documented evidence of premeditated fraud. Marcus moved fast. He filed a counter-petition alleging that Austin Preston had entered into marriage with Vanessa Cooper for the specific purpose of gaining access to property he intended to develop for profit. We attached the emails, the appraiser statements, Clayton's detailed report. Then Marcus did something brilliant. He subpoenaed Austin's phone records and email accounts for the period between his engagement and the wedding. The hearing was set for late July. I arrived at the courthouse in Napa, feeling like I was 64 going on 100. This wasn't how I'd imagined spending my summer, fighting my own daughter in court over land I'd spent my life building. The courtroom was exactly what you'd expect. Wood paneling, American flag, judge's bench that made everyone look small. The Prestons arrived with their legal team, 3 attorneys in suits that probably cost more than my truck. Vanessa sat between Austin and Charlotte, her face pale and set. She didn't look at me once. The judge, a woman named Margaret Chen, who'd been on the bench for 20 years. Read through both petitions with the expression of someone who'd seen money in every scheme humanity could devise. "Mr. Wade," she said to Marcus, "you're alleging fraud." "Yes." "Your Honor, we have documented evidence that Mr. Austin Preston initiated his relationship with Miss Vanessa Cooper with the specific intent of acquiring her inheritance. The marriage was a business transaction disguised as romance." Whitmore stood up, all polish and indignation. "Your Honor, these are baseless accusations designed to distract from the real issue. Mr. Cooper's declining mental state and his irrational decision to disinherit his only child." "Then let's examine that mental state," Judge Chen said. "I'm ordering an independent psychiatric evaluation of Mr. Cooper. And Mr. Wade, I'm granting your discovery motion. Mr. Preston's communications are subject to subpoena." Austin's face went rigid. Roger leaned over to whisper something to their lead attorney, his expression thunderous. "We'll reconvene in 30 days, Judge Chen announced, "by which time I expect complete medical evaluation and all requested documents. This court is interested in the truth. Gentlemen, not theater." We filed out in the hallway. Roger Preston intercepted me, his face a mask of controlled rage. "You're making a mistake." "Old man, we have resources you can't imagine. Lawyers who specialize in destroying people like you." I looked at him. This titan of San Francisco real estate who thought money could buy anything, even stolen land. "Roger, I've spent 30 years growing things. You know what I've learned. You can't force growth. You can't buy maturity. And you definitely can't steal patience." I smiled without warmth. "You're about to learn that the hard way." His face darkened, but before he could respond, Marcus pulled me away. In the parking lot, I sat in my truck for a long moment before starting the engine. The battle lines were drawn. The Preston would throw everything they had at me. Money, lawyers, social pressure, attempts to destroy my credibility. But I had something they didn't. I had the truth. And in my experience, truth was like good wine. It might take time to appreciate, but eventually everyone recognizes quality. I drove home through the valley, past vineyard after vineyard, each one representing someone's dream, made real through work and time. The Preston saw all of this as just real estate, just numbers on a balance sheet. They were about to learn that some things aren't for sale, and some old men aren't as easy to bury as they look. The war had truly begun, but I'd fought drought, disease, bad harvests, and economic downturns. Roger Preston and his lawyers, they were just another challenge to weather, and I was very good at weathering storms. The psychiatric evaluation took place on August 3rd in a sterile office that smelled like disinfectant and judgment. Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to the judge, put me through 4 hours of cognitive testing, memory recall, problem solving, spatial reasoning, emotional stability assessment. I answered every question, solved every puzzle, remembered every word in the sequence she gave me. When we finished, she looked at her notes and then at me. "Mr. Cooper, your cognitive function is well above average for your age. No signs of dementia, no memory impairment, no evidence of diminished capacity. Your decision-making faculties are completely intact. Can you put that in writing? I'll submit my report to the court by Friday." One problem solved, but the Preston weren't done. The next attack came through the Napa wine community. Suddenly, rumors began circulating. Leonard Cooper was losing his mind, making wild accusations against his son-in-law, destroying his daughter's marriage out of senile paranoia. Charlotte Preston, it turned out, sat on the board of 2 wine industry associations. She was using every connection she had to isolate me professionally. 2 suppliers I'd worked with for years suddenly stopped returning my calls. A restaurant that had been buying my wine for a decade canceled their standing order. The message was clear. Cross the Preston. Pay the price. Isabella noticed it, too. They're trying to strangle you economically, force you to settle. Let them try. I've weathered worse, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. Watching my reputation, built over 3 decades, get shredded by whispers and innuendo from people who'd never spent a day working soil. Marcus called with worse news. Leonard. They're pushing hard on the discovery. Their lawyers are arguing that Austin's emails are protected by attorney-client privilege. He wasn't talking to lawyers. He was talking to real estate agents. They're claiming he consulted with lawyers about the property. So, all communications related to it are privileged. It's creative legal maneuvering, and Judge Chen might buy it. So, we might not get the emails. We might not get all of them. But, Leonard, there's something else. Vanessa is giving a deposition next week. They're going to have her testify to your supposed mental decline. My daughter in a courtroom lying about me under oath. Can we depose Austin? We can try. But he'll have 3 lawyers coaching every word. The deposition happened in a conference room that felt designed to intimidate. All glass and chrome and uncomfortable chairs. Vanessa sat across from Marcus, her lawyers flanking her like guards. I wasn't allowed in the room, but I read the transcript afterward. Marcus asked her direct questions. When did you first notice your father's mental decline? Can you provide specific examples? Did you document these concerns with his doctor? Her answers were vague, contradictory. He seemed confused sometimes. He forgot conversations we'd had. He made this trust decision so suddenly, but under pressure. She fell apart. She couldn't provide dates, couldn't give specific examples, couldn't explain why she'd never mentioned any concerns to his doctor or neighbors. By the end, even her own lawyers looked uncomfortable. Then Marcus asked the killing question. Miss Preston, when did your husband first express interest in your father's property? I don't. That's not relevant. Please answer the question. When did Austin Preston first discuss the value or development potential of your father's vineyard? Long silence in the transcript. Then I don't recall exactly. Was it before or after your engagement? I said I don't recall. Marcus sent me the transcript with a note. She's protecting him. But she's lying badly. Our break came from an unexpected source. Austin's own arrogance. One of the appraisers Clayton had contacted, a man named David Torres, called me directly. Mr. Cooper, I thought you should know. Austin Preston tried to pressure me into withdrawing my statement. He implied there would be professional consequences if I testified against him. Can you document that I recorded the phone call? California is a 2-party consent state, so it's legal. Marcus nearly shouted when I told him. That's witness tampering. That's a felony. We submitted the recording to the court. Judge Chen's response was swift and brutal. She sanctioned the Preston legal team, ordered all of Austin's communications turned over immediately without privilege protection, and moved the hearing up by 2 weeks. The court, she wrote in her order, will not tolerate attempts to obstruct justice or intimidate witnesses. The documents arrived 3 days later, boxes of them, emails, texts, phone records. Marcus and I spent 2 solid days reading through Austin Preston's digital life. It was all there, every bit of it, emails to his father. The old man sitting on at least $4 million. Vanessa's the key. Text to a business partner. Wedding in May. Property transfer by summer. Development by fall. This is going to be huge. Messages to Vanessa that made my stomach turn. Don't worry about your dad. Once we're married, the property becomes family assets. We'll handle him together. But the worst was an email Austin sent to Roger 2 weeks after the wedding. Subject line, the Cooper problem. Dad. The old man is more stubborn than expected. Vanessa can't convince him to sign over the property. We need to consider legal options to have him declared incompetent. Mom's friend knows a psychiatrist who specializes in elder care evaluations. Might be useful. They'd been planning this from the start. The whole incompetency petition wasn't a response to my trust. It was always their backup plan. Marcus filed an emergency motion attaching the complete email chain. By the time we finished, we had documentation of fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy, witness intimidation, and perjury in Vanessa's deposition. Judge Chen scheduled a hearing for August 26th. The night before, I sat on my porch with a bottle of my 2017 reserve, watching the stars over the vineyard. 30 years of work. And it had come down to this. A courtroom battle where my own daughter stood against me, defending a man who'd systematically planned to rob us both. Because that was the bitter truth I'd finally accepted. Austin had been using Vanessa just as much as he'd been using me. She was never his wife. She was his access code to a vault. Tomorrow, I'd prove it. Tomorrow. Judge Chen would see exactly what kind of people the Preston were. But tonight, I just felt tired and sad, and old in a way that had nothing to do with years. Isabella found me there around 10 o'clock. She sat down without asking, poured herself some of my wine, and we sat in silence for a long time. You're going to win, she finally said. I know. So why do you look like you've lost? I thought about Vanessa at 6 years old, planting her first grapevine. About Vanessa at 16, helping with her first harvest. About Vanessa last month, signing documents that called me mentally incompetent because winning means proving my daughter married a monster and lived with him long enough to become one too. Isabella had no answer for that. Neither did I. Tomorrow we'd go to court. Tomorrow I'd destroy the Preston with their own words. Tomorrow I'd protect everything I'd built. But some victories, I was learning taste like ashes, no matter how complete they are. The hearing on August 26th lasted 6 hours. Judge Chen methodically reviewed every email, every text message, every piece of evidence Marcus and I had assembled. The Preston's legal team tried everything. Objections, procedural challenges, attempts to exclude evidence. But the paper trail was too clear, too damning. Austin's emails were read aloud in open court. His words, cold, calculating, predatory, echoed off the walls as he sat rigid beside his lawyers, his face cycling through shades of white and red like a broken traffic light. When Judge Chen read the email about getting Vanessa to sell the old man's dirt, I watched my daughter's face crumble. She'd known Austin was interested in the property, but hearing the extent of his deception, hearing herself referred to as a tool, a means to an end, finally broke through whatever fantasy she'd been living. The judge's ruling was swift and absolute. The petition to invalidate Mr. Cooper's trust is denied. Furthermore, this court finds clear and convincing evidence of attempted fraud. The trust stands as written. This enter's concluded. She looked directly at Austin. Mr. Preston, I'm referring the evidence of witness tampering to the district attorney's office. You should consider retaining criminal counsel. Roger Preston's face went purple. Charlotte looked like she'd been slapped. Austin just stared at the table, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. We left the courthouse into a wall of reporters. The story had leaked, probably through court staff who'd seen the evidence, and the local press had descended like vultures on fresh meat. Mr. Cooper, Is it true that Preston's tried to steal your land through marriage, mister? Preston, did you marry Vanessa Cooper for her inheritance? How does it feel knowing your son-in-law planned to develop your vineyard? I said nothing, just walked to my truck, but the reporters followed the Preston, and I watched their ordeal with something close to satisfaction. Roger trying to maintain dignity while cameras captured his rage. Charlotte clutching her designer bag like armor. Austin hiding behind his lawyers, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The Napa Valley Register ran the story the next morning. Preston family accused of marriage fraud in vineyard scheme. The article laid out everything. The emails, the appraisals, the systematic plan to acquire my land through deception. By afternoon, it had spread to the San Francisco Chronicle, then to wine industry publications, then to business journals. The story had everything readers loved: wealthy villains, an underdog victim, documented proof of conspiracy. Roger's real estate empire started crumbling immediately. 3 major clients canceled projects, citing ethical concerns. 2 partners withdrew from developments. The San Francisco Business Council quietly removed him from their board. Austin fared worse. His investment clients, wealthy individuals who valued discretion and integrity, began pulling their accounts. Nobody wants a financial advisor who married for money and got caught. Within a week, he lost 60% of his portfolio. Charlotte's social standing evaporated. The museums and charities she'd supported suddenly had no room for her on their boards. Invitations dried up. The society pages that once featured her philanthropic work now detailed her family's disgrace. My phone rang at 2 a.m, 3 weeks after the hearing. Vanessa, her voice wrecked with crying. Dad, what have you done? Austin says this is all my fault. He says I ruined everything. The Preston are losing clients, losing money, losing their reputation, and it's all because of me. I sat up in bed, turning on the light. No. Vanessa, it's because of what they did, what you helped them do. I didn't know. I didn't know he was planning all of this. You knew enough. You knew he was interested in my land. You knew he was pushing for me to transfer ownership. You signed documents declaring me incompetent. My voice stayed calm, steady. You chose their side at every turn, because I loved him, because I thought. You thought what? That you could have both, that you could betray your father and keep your family money. Silence, then small and broken. He's leaving me. Dad, Austin filed for divorce yesterday. He says I didn't deliver what I promised. Those were his exact words. Didn't deliver. There it was, the final blow. Austin had used her completely, then discarded her the moment she became a liability rather than an asset. I'm sorry you're hurting, I said, and I meant it. But this isn't my fault. Vanessa, this is what happens when you build a marriage on lies and greed. The Preston are saying I'm the one who pushed for all of this. Charlotte told everyone I was obsessed with their money, that I manipulated Austin into pursuing your land. They're making me the villain. Of course they were. The Preston were expert operators. When they couldn't win, they found someone else to blame. And Vanessa, isolated and desperate, made the perfect scapegoat. Then you understand how it feels, I said quietly, to be abandoned by people who claim to love you, to have your name destroyed by people you trusted. Dad, please, can I come home? Can we? Not yet. You made choices. Vanessa, conscious, deliberate choices. You don't get to run back to me just because those choices had consequences. I hung up, sat in the dark of my bedroom, listening to the night sounds of the vineyard, Wind through the vines, distant coyotes, the ancient earth settling. I'd won completely, decisively, brutally. The Preston were ruined. Austin had lost his business, his reputation, his marriage. Roger and Charlotte would spend years rebuilding what they'd destroyed. Vanessa was learning that betrayal works both ways. But victory felt like ash in my mouth because I'd also lost something irreplaceable. Trust in my daughter. Faith that family meant something beyond transactions and inheritance. The grapes were ripening in the vineyard, getting ready for harvest. In a few weeks, we'd pick them, crush them, begin the long process of fermentation and aging. Wine takes time, so does trust. The question was whether Vanessa understood that, whether she was capable of the patience required to rebuild what she'd destroyed. I'd know soon enough, because despite everything, she was still my daughter, and the door wasn't closed forever, just narrowed to a very specific, very difficult path that required genuine change. September would tell me what she was made of. She appeared on my doorstep on a September afternoon when the light turns gold and the air smells like ripening grapes. No BMW this time. She'd arrived in an Uber. No designer clothes. Just jeans and an old sweater I'd recognized from her college years. Vanessa stood there with a small suitcase, her face older than it should be, her eyes red from crying. In her hand, she clutched her wedding ring, not wearing it, but holding it like evidence of her own stupidity. She said just that, nothing else. I stood in the doorway of the house where I'd raised her, looking at this stranger who wore my daughter's face, and I felt something crack inside my chest. Not quite forgiveness, not quite hope, but something in that territory. "Come in," I said. We sat at the kitchen table where we'd eaten 1,000 meals together. I made coffee, because that's what you do when you don't know what to say. She stared at her hands at the ring that had meant everything to her 3 months ago, and now meant nothing at all. "Austin filed the divorce papers," she said finally. "He's claiming I defrauded him. Says I promised him access to your property and then sabotaged the relationship. His lawyers are demanding I pay back the wedding expenses, all $200,000. I let that sink in. Can he do that? Probably not. But he's trying. The Preston are burning everything down, and I'm in the blast radius. She looked up at me. I was stupid. Dad, unforgivably stupid. I let them convince me that you were the problem, that you were holding me back, that your life was somehow less valuable than theirs. Why? Because I wanted to belong somewhere. After Mom died, I felt like I was drowning. And when Austin showed up with his perfect family and his perfect life, I thought that was the answer. I thought if I could just fit into their world, I wouldn't hurt anymore. She was crying now, tears tracking down her face in a way that reminded me painfully of her mother. "But you didn't fit," I said gently. "You just bent yourself into shapes that weren't you." I know, and by the time I realized it, I'd already burned everything down. I chose money over you, status over family, lies over truth. She wiped her eyes. "The Preston are blaming me for everything. Charlotte called me a gold digger at a charity event. Roger's lawyers are investigating whether they can sue me for damages. Austin told his friends I trapped him into marriage. They're scapegoating you because that's what they do. They destroy people and walk away clean." She looked at me with something like wonder. "But you didn't let them do it to you. You fought back. You protected yourself when I wouldn't protect you." We sat in silence. Outside, I could see the vineyard in the afternoon light, rows of vines heavy with grapes almost ready for harvest. 30 years of work nearly stolen, now secure. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Vanessa said. "I don't expect anything. But I came to tell you that you were right about everything about Austin, about the Prestons, about what really matters. And I came to ask, Her voice broke. Is there any way back? I thought about the trust documents sitting in Marcus's office, the conditions I'd written that she'd have to meet, the years of work ahead if she wanted to inherit this land. There's a way, I said slowly, but it's not easy, and it's not quick. Tell me, the trust has conditions. If you want this vineyard after I'm gone, you work here for 5 years. Not visiting. Working. Learning every aspect of wine-making aching. You live here. You tend the vines. You do the harvest. No shortcuts. No hired managers. No selling out after a year. 5 years, she repeated. And you can't sell the land for 15 years after that. If you violate either condition, everything goes to charity. The house, the equipment, all 20 acres. She absorbed this. You're saying I have to prove I care about this place more than the money? I'm saying you have to actually care about this place more than the money. Not prove it. Become it. Vanessa looked out at the vineyard. I tried to see it through her eyes. 5 years of physical labor, of modest living, of patience and work without immediate reward. Everything the Preston had taught her to despise. When do I start? She asked. Tomorrow. Harvest begins next week. You'll be here for every day of it. She nodded, something like determination crossing her face. I'll need to get my things from the apartment. Austin's lawyers are fighting over everything. But I don't care anymore. He can have it all. Vanessa, this won't be easy. Working a vineyard is back-breaking. The pay is barely enough to live on. Your friends won't understand. You'll be giving up. I'm not giving up anything that matters, she interrupted. I already lost what matters. This is trying to find it again. We talked for another hour, working out logistics. She'd move into the guest room, the same room she'd slept in as a child. She'd start with the basic tasks: pruning, irrigation management, soil testing. Marcus would update the trust to reflect her commitment. As the sun set, turning the hills the color of merlot, I walked her out to the vineyard. We stood among the vines I'd planted 30 years ago, heavy with fruit that would soon become wine. Your mother helped to plant this section, I said. You were 6 years old. You dug holes with a tell while she and I set the rootstock. I remember, Vanessa said softly. I asked if they'd grow into magic bean talks, and I told you they'd grow into something better, something real. We stood there as darkness fell over the valley. 2 people who'd nearly destroyed each other, trying to find a path back to something resembling family. Those 3 words, Vanessa said. When I called demanding $50,000 and you said, "See you in court." That changed everything, didn't it? It was the moment I stopped being your victim and started being your father again. The moment I chose to protect what I'd built instead of letting you tear it down. I'm glad you did, she whispered, even though it hurt, even though it exposed everything. I looked at my daughter, broken, humbled, finally willing to learn the lessons I'd been trying to teach her whole life. Lessons about patience, about work, about the difference between value and price. Grapes take time, I said. You can't rush fermentation. You can't shortcut aging. The best wine comes from patience and care and understanding that some things can't be forced. Like trust, Vanessa said. Like trust. The vineyard stretched around us in the darkness, vines rustling in the evening breeze. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the sound of Isabella's tractor. My neighbor was already out there when I stepped onto the porch, moving between the rows with the steady rhythm of someone who had finally stopped resisting the land and started listening to it instead, preparing for her own harvest, hands already marked by the work that had sustained this valley for generations, long before any of us decided to call it property. I watched her for a moment without interruption, The way you observe something you've spent years protecting without ever fully owning. And I thought about how strange it was that victory never really arrives with noise or celebration. It arrives like this, in ordinary motion, in continuity, in work that simply refuses to stop existing because someone decided to interfere with it. I'd won my war, if that word even deserved to be used anymore, protected my legacy, drawn out every legal boundary I needed to draw, made every decision that ensured the Prestons and their son understood something they had apparently forgotten, that some old men are not as easy to erase as they assume, when they look only at age and not at experience. But the truth I had come to accept, slowly and without ceremony, was that victory is rarely clean, and even when it is justified, it still leaves fingerprints on everything it touches. Vanessa would work the harvest. She'd live here, learn here, maybe find her way back to who she used to be before life bent her in directions she never chose. Or maybe she wouldn't, because not every story resolves into restoration, and not every person returns to an earlier version of themselves just because the conditions improve. The trust would do its part, cold and precise in the way legal structures are meant to be, ensuring that the land stayed land, that the vines kept producing fruit instead of being replaced by glass and concrete, that what I had built and preserved would not be erased by people who only saw value in transformation rather than continuity. And that alone gave me a kind of quiet satisfaction, not joy exactly, but stability, the closest thing to peace I had learned to trust. And yet even that stability carried weight, because I had learned that nothing meaningful stays simple for long once you've had to fight to preserve it. I leaned on the railing and watched the rows stretch into the distance, thinking about how vines don't rush themselves, how they don't negotiate with seasons or argue with time. They simply grow when conditions allow and endure when they don't. And somewhere in that patience, there was a lesson I had spent most of my life resisting. Vanessa paused in the field for a moment, looking up briefly as if she felt the presence of someone watching. And I wondered what she saw now when she looked at this place, not just land or inheritance or obligation, but something that required participation instead of possession. The truth was that wine, like family, like trust, like forgiveness, takes time and patience in a way that no document can accelerate and no decision can shortcut. Because the best things in life are not transactions, but processes. And processes demand something. Most people are unwilling to give consistency over time without guaranteed outcome. And as I stood there in the quiet morning light, I understood that my role in all of it was not to control every outcome, not to predict every failure or enforce every correction, but simply to ensure that what had been started could continue growing without being interrupted by those who confused speed with progress. Because the hardest truth I had learned after years of litigation, negotiation, loss, and recovery was that what matters most in life cannot be rushed, cannot be bought, cannot be stolen. It has to be grown, slowly, deliberately, and with the acceptance that even the best harvest is never just the result of one season, but of many years of patience finally deciding to become something visible. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.